Visceral obesity is always accompanied by metabolic derangement, and that visceral obesity leads to insulin resistance. It leads to elevated triglycerides. It leads to raised blood pressure. It leads to elevated blood pressure through the renin-angiotensin system. It leads to elevated triglycerides. It leads to elevated insulin resistance because of the deformation and the damage to the hepatocyte. It's this altered adverse metabolic syndrome that affects more than 25% of all US adults that's really the issue. And in reality, it probably affects 60 to 70% of US adults, and we can clinically identify it. So adipose tissue produces a whole host of pro-inflammatory compounds. And the reason why it does this is that from a homology standpoint, from a standpoint of functionality, fat cells and the immune system are interlinked. The primitive immune cell and the primitive fat cell are from the same cell line. And you can see this in the Drosophila, in which the fat body is the very same thing as the humoral defense system. And that's why adipose tissue produces cytokines that are pro-inflammatory. Things like TNF-alpha, IL-6, IL-1B, leptin, adiponectin, resistin. All of these things are pro-inflammatory. Immature fat cells transdifferentiate into macrophages in vitro and in vivo. And this is well documented in the Drosophila model. Leptin, which is our satiety hormone, is similar to other cytokines as IL-2. Leptin is hyperleptin status is found in patients with hyperinsulin status. And you see leptin resistance in parallel with insulin resistance. And for this reason, individuals that have extraordinarily high leptin are predisposed to having an inflammatory storm, i.e., the thing that affects patients that get COVID. IL-6 is an endocrine cytokine. It's produced locally by fat cells, and historically we've really viewed it as a paracrine function, but it also has remote functions as well, and it's fairly significant. IL-6 concentration parallels the concentration or the total whole body adiposity. And C-reactive protein produced by the liver is governed by the circulating IL-6. So when we measure CRP, what we're really measuring is IL-6 produced from adipose tissue. And that's fairly significant. There's another function in that there's an elevation in fibrinogen, which increases platelet number and platelet activity, which contributes to clot formation, which, if you'll remember, is very commonly found in patients with COVID-19 who have metabolic derangement. And it's these patients that have a hyperleptin state, have a predisposed high CRP, that are then predisposed to clotting throughout their whole body. Fat is one of the crucial alarm systems. It rouses the innate immune system. It triggers acute phase response. It's part of the immune system, just like the cholesterol system is part of the immune system. It's not independent. Adipose tissue elaborates acute inflammatory signals, and if you dysregulate these signals, it causes a triggering of chronic inflammation, and it is associated with characteristics of metabolic syndrome. As you chronicize, or if you make this become chronic, and this happens typically with metabolic changes that are maladaptive, you start to get elevations in acute phase reactants and CRP, you start to get changes in leptin, you start to get IL-6 changes. At the same time, you get hyperglycemia, hypertriglyceridemia, and impaired lipolysis, and you start to get increasing dysfunction in your coagulation. Now, we've done some studies on diet-induced obesity, and the reality is that there's a dopaminergic signaling that occurs very akin to exposure to opiates. And that dopaminergic signaling occurs when you trigger the brain's reward system. It's very similar to other drugs of abuse. So there's an interaction between the dopaminergic system and the consumption of drugs of abuse. And in fact, if you use a knockout model on the mouse and you knock out the DA-DR signaling, then the mouse cannot become obese and cannot overconsume. And it's been shown that even with hyperpalatable food that a normal mouse would excessively gorge on, mice with a dopamine knockout will not gorge and will not overeat. They cannot become addicted to something if they don't have the dopaminergic signal. So at the end of the day, dopamine is the signal that links the consumption of food, and the consumption of food stimulates the dopamine release, and that dopamine release gives a enhanced non-nutritive dietary intake, which then causes excessive fat accumulation, which then increases inflammatory mediators, which then increases pain, which then causes a further seeking of dopaminergic stimulation, and then the cycle repeats. The practical conclusion from this is that the patients become obese, they become associated with addiction, and they become associated with increased pain because of the interaction of the exogenous food that you've added, and that patients will self-substitute dopamine agonists that they can easily get, which may be our processed food system. So meta-inflammation is really a low-grade chronic inflammation orchestrated by the metabolic cells in response to excessive nutrients and energy. The obesity itself that we're seeing is the inflammatory state. When you see patients with tremendous amount of visceral fat, you're seeing the inflammatory state. And even if they're thin right now, they're still in an inflammatory state, which you can measure by biomarkers. It results from hyperinsulinemia. Hyperinsulinemia serves as the common linkage between the tissue inflammation and the metabolic syndrome. There's a whole host of diseases that we already knew that were related, and that hyperinsulinemia is just to the tip of the iceberg. It's the part that we can see. But underlying all of this is all of the things that insulin is doing and creating long term. So we've seen about, in the last 100 years, a steady increase in type 2 diabetes with the introduction of industrial seed oils. And that may be one of the key elements that we've got to look at when we look at treatment algorithms and options. And you'll notice that right around 1977, or a little bit thereafter, we started to see an increase in the rate of patients with diabetes and the percentage of patients with diabetes. And if you superimpose the map of canola oil utilization, you would see a mirroring of this, just that the canola oil starts a little bit right after 1977, and you start to see the rate of diabetes start to climb about 5 to 7 years later. The issue is the oxidized linoleic acid. We've had 2 to 3 million years of human history, but only in 1917 did we really start to see industrial seed oil become a significant part of the human diet. And we saw an uptick in the late 1970s. And that was really with the promotion of canola oil and other vegetable oils being heart healthy. And this was a marketing ploy more than it was a statement of true medical information. The issue is that we started to label food as low fat, and that low fat we substituted with sugar to get the content that we needed. The reality is that we should avoid low fat labeled food. We should eat real food. The 1977 initial dietary guidelines promoted a reduction in fat consumption, and they allowed an increase in carbohydrate consumption. So in essence, it was this experiment in dietary guidelines that is at the nexus of the initiation of our metabolic dysfunction increase. I predict that one day we'll look at industrial seed oils with the same disdain that we have with cigarette smoking. Soybean oil is one of the most widely consumed edible oils in the United States, and we know that has a fairly significant effect, not just on the dopaminergic system, but the soybean oil itself has a fairly significant effect on oxytocin, and has a fairly significant effect on the hypothalamus. And the oxytocin center, it affects some of the gene regulation and affects bonding between mother and child. Soybean oil is a polyunsaturated fatty acid, and it's being promoted as a heart healthy option. But the issue is that it probably leads to obesity and diabetes. The other reality is that big food is big profit first. Their job is to sell more product. And if their fiduciary interest is to sell more product, it's highly unlikely that they're going to turn around and sell less of something. Their job is to cause increased consumption of food by increasing hunger sensation and reducing long-term satiety. Right now, the recommendation is to consume about 22 teaspoons of sugar per day that fall within the recommended guidelines, despite the fact that there's no inherent need of sugar whatsoever, no exogenous need of sugar. The other thing is that when we tell our patients that we want them to go onto a diet, they start to think, well, I'm going to feel deprived. And the more deprived somebody feels, the more likely they are to demand an increase of something, to demand it because they want that desirability. Anytime you take something away, it increases its allure for patients. I always tell patients, instead of focusing in on calories, focus in on real food. It's not what you didn't eat, it's what you did eat and who you are that matters. You know what the truth about vegetable oil is. We don't want you to fall prey to the big processed food companies. You're the person that doesn't eat sugar. It's kind of changing the paradigm of the patient and refocusing their attention. I don't have them think of this as a diet. I have them think of this as a change in lifestyle that's permanent. Once I start having patients focus on feeding windows, that allows them to start depleting their glycogen of excessive glycogen reserves in their liver. And what I try to do is get them to eat in a shorter and shorter window. I try to have them eliminate breakfast because most patients, when they start to eat breakfast, they'll eat all day long. I try to get them to eliminate snacking. If I can get them to do that, I can reduce the total number of insulin spikes and the area under the curve for insulin throughout the day. I really don't have them count calories. I don't think there's really any benefit for it. And I really feel like calorie counting is self-deception. And frequently, I'll find that patients will self-reward by saying, oh, well, I did 2 miles on my walking treadmill, and so now I get to eat some extra calories. And the reality is that even if we're perfect at tracking calories, it would be highly inaccurate. The resting metabolic caloric requirement changes so significantly minute to minute, day to day, hour to hour, that it really doesn't make much sense. And the gut microbiome really determines this. It's the interaction between the enteric nervous system and the central nervous system that is the most significant, and that's significantly impacted by the microbiome. Instead of calorie counting, I tell them to eat till their belly is about 80% full, or hari hachipu. Eat until 8 out of 10 parts full. If they do that, it changes their relationship with food. It keeps them from focusing in on overconsumption. The reality is that if you spend all of your willpower counting calories and calorie restriction, you may not end up doing the right thing. And so what I want to do is push this into the background so that they're not counting calories and feeling deprived all the time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. We don't sell anything. We give our protocols away for free. If anybody has any questions, please give me a ring. Thank you so much.